You here? Oh no, that's you're here. So of course you can hear. It's okay. So I did send out the link to folks. We are recording this tonight, so that we can post it. Hey, Sandra, I've got a badge for you too. Here you go, Sandra. I want to welcome everybody tonight. Cindy Kohler with the Office of Equity and Community Engagement, the Neighborhood and Community Liaison. Our first fireside chat. We wanted to have a mechanism where the neighborhoods could get together, introduce themselves, talk about things that are happening in the neighborhood, areas where you might need some peer support or some city support, or just generally have questions about some of the cool things that are happening, or some of the things that you're like, wait a minute, are we really doing that? So we wanted to provide space where we could sit comfortably, enjoy a little fire, enjoy big fire, little snack, and just hang out. So I wanted to, everybody should have a visitor badge, unless you've got your city badge.
I don't.
I will get you one, yeah. I will hook you up. These are important to have. If you need to go to the restroom, I will tell you where those are. You'll want to have this on. Our security guard is roaming. If you see somebody wandering around without a badge, he's tends to get a little anxious. And his name's Kirby, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. And then once he leaves at 6, we'll have the EPD roaming around. So we want to make sure that everybody has their little bit of your badge on. The bathrooms, if you could just walk straight through this wall right here, that's where the bathrooms are. There's 2 of them. There's a key code. And once you get inside, you need to flip the lock and a red light will flash on the outside, letting folks know that it's occupied. The code is 1952. So if anybody has anything fantastic, historic wise, that happened in 1952, now's a really great time to share it.
It's my birthday.
There we go, Jan was born in 1952. That is great. That is great. So we've got our historical moment right here. Perfect. I wanted to start out with introductions. We'll go through staff first quickly. And what I'm asking for the neighborhoods to share is your name, who you're with, what role you have on your board, and then very briefly, it's October. So let's do a chill and a thrill. Something that's happened in your work with the neighborhood that brought you joy, something that brought you satisfaction, the thrill. And then also chill, it doesn't have to be something frightening, but something that you learned and it was kind of like, I didn't know that, or something that you would like to share that was a good learning moment that would benefit those in the room. So we've got a wonderful presentation from Leah and crew. So we want to keep that part short. We're going to go to staff first. Jeff, you're up.
Great. Jeff Kepper, I'm a senior planner on our land use planning team. And so I handle a lot of things that are related to the development that happens around town, kind of how things progress. And I'll be presenting tonight on housing options in Eugene as that kind of expands and grows over time.
Hi, I'm Zoli Goodand-Dalton. I'm an assistant planner on the community planning and design team. And I'm here to talk about the land use designation map with Leah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your name.
Zoli.
Zoe,
Yeah.
okay, thanks. I'm Thea Evans. I'm a senior GIS analyst, also on the community and planning design team. And yeah, we'll be talking about the land use designation map.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Roush. I'm a senior planner on community planning and design, which is our long range planning team. I'm going to be talking about our urban growth boundary planning called Urban Growth Strategies. So thank you all for having us.
Hello, everybody, and it's good to see you all again. My name is Julian Arias, and I work in Office of Equity and Community Engagement. I do a lot of admin support for the office, mostly working with the neighborhoods.
Hi all, Fabio Andrade. I manage the Office of Equity and Community Engagement. Thanks for being here.
Okay, neighborhoods, who you are, who you're with, what role you serve, real and chill, Jan.
My name's Jan Spencer, and I'm in the River Road neighborhood, and I've been on the board for a couple dozen years over the time. I think maybe a highlight we had in our neighborhood that I felt awesome about was our neighborhood, river celebration we did in early September in the Greenway along the river. The city was awesome, you know, with the assistance and, the Filbert Grove, Razor Park. A lot of people came, a lot of community groups. It was really nice.
Jeff?
Jeff Philpott, Fairmont Neighbors Association. Thrilled for a great second annual summer social at Washburn a month ago, went really well. And so it's always good to sort of get some people recruited and working with all of us. We got a lot of things going on right now, so I'll call this a chill just in terms of the amount of stuff on the docket. And that's East University expansion and Fairmont Boulevard, specifically and University District.
Let's go, Lynn, and then we'll come back around.
I'm Woodridge, I'm the co-chair of the Active Bethel Community. A thrill would probably be, the We Are Bethel celebration. We had over 300 attendees and about 50 booths, community booths. And 4 food trucks and performers, and it was a lot of fun. And then the chill would be, we have a lot of things going on right now with concerns. USD Clean Fuels Facility is a big deal right now. We're trying to get the proposed location moved to an area that is not in a residential area. And that's something I'm going to be speaking about today.
My name is Margaret Steinbrun. I'm the chair of the Whitaker Community Council. Not only are we a recognized neighborhood association, but we're one of 3 nonprofits. And recently we were approved we got a $750,000 Healthy Homes grant. So we're going to start, I believe, and this is tentatively, but the Whitaker Community Council originally started before there were councils with the co-op. Any of you that are familiar with the Whitaker know that there's a Whitaker co-op, which is a housing area. And we're gonna go in there and help redo their homes. That I'm gonna guess haven't been done since 1974. So that's really exciting and it's coming up. We have lots of work. We've done some great grant work. And as far as what, let's see. I learned that I will never, ever sign my name to a document that we send to the city that the board put out. I really recommend that you just leave the signature blank. And just put the name of your association and leave it at that. And I will never do that again.
Thank you.
Learned so much.
Well, it's an ongoing, story, so.
That's Jerome. I'm relatively new to the River Road Community Organization Board. I'm serving as co-chair this year. Jan talked about the river celebration, which was really wonderful, and it was a collaborative effort. A lot of people involved in that, so that was really satisfying. And I guess the other one, our last meeting, we had Alyssa from the city come and talk about annexation, which in our area is a hot topic, and we had really good audience participation, good questions. She did a marvelous job. And then I guess for me, being new to the board and new to this role as co-chair, it's been really getting to know the city staff and seeing the willingness to work with us and to spend some time. I just really appreciated that.
Thank you.
Noel Brunel. I'm co-chair of the Downtown Neighborhood Association. We pretty much nearly collapsed this year, but we, I think, are on the way to recovery. Actually managed to get a quorum at a meeting twice in a row. What I'll share that I have found useful is if you don't have a website yet, the city provided Google Sites is not bad. You really don't need to hire a web designer to get a functional page, so. It's okay.
Thank you for plugging that. And I will get back to you.
I would like to, the one
issue with it so far is that, it doesn't by default give you a very nice URL. But hoping to find out soon whether or not that can be fixed.
Thank you, thank you. And our most recently activated neighborhood association, Harlow Neighbors, yes.
I'm Catherine Collins Jensen. I'm the chair from the Harlow Neighborhood Association that I think was just put back in this summer. So we are also in a rebuilding phase, and that would be my kind of chill that we tried to have a meeting here in October, which kind of turned into a giant flop. So if we could get, if I could get specifically some tips on how you guys kind of spread the word about the happenings and meetings and how you drive attendance, that would be really great. Excellent.
My name is Robert McConnell, and I'm the treasurer of the Amazon Neighborhood Association. You'd say that Amazon is, Eugene's version of Mayberry, RFP, is a kind of sleepy, quiet little neighborhood where not much happens, so we don't have any thrills or chills for it.
As Guy Avion with the County Neighborhood Association, I'm the secretary, and my birth year is 1955, in case they ever. I don't want to steal the thunder for Cal Young, just north of here, like the big part. And I won't steal any thunder for the chair here, so my thrill and chill is living next to Sheldon High School, right across the fence. So I find all kinds of things in my backyard, and thank goodness they went to vaping instead of smoking cigarettes, because they don't have any cigarette butts in the yard. And right where all the football guys come in and go, you know, and it's kind of noisy sometimes.
Hi, I'm Katie Werner, the chair of the Cal Young Neighborhood Association. And we actually had something pretty exciting. We had our first board meeting in person since I've been a member. We've been we started pretty much close to COVID time. I started close to COVID time, and then it was really fun. We were headed to Bangers and Brews and had a great little board meeting. And I learned that my crew is good if you delegate to them, but you have to be organized enough to delegate. And I'm just, I guess my chill or whatever is just finding the time, just finding time to get organized. So, but got a great crew.
Jensina Hawkins, Vice Chair, Churchill Area Neighbors. Our chill is that we had a rape in broad daylight of the Wild Iris hiking bridge, and that person still is not caught yet. Which makes a lot of people in our area very concerned about going hiking. And our thrill was last month we put on the citywide healthcare forum, and we had about 200 in attendance, and there were about another 600 views online. We've got a ton of news coverage. It turned into something way huger than we ever thought it would be. Thank you. Thank you.
Chris Jocka, I'm chair of the Southwest Hills Neighborhood Association. I've only lived in Eugene for about 4 years, and I've been involved in the neighborhood association for 3 and chaired for 2. I guess our thrills would be we've had over the last year and a half, 3 pretty well attended general meetings, 1 on homelessness, 2 on wildfire related issues. And they were attended, which means about 6 people. We were happy about that. And good responses for that. And again, to repeat others, so the chill is one, finding the time, but as well, getting people involved. And announce meetings and how many people show up? We're hoping tomorrow night we're doing a sort of an election forum, although I can only get one candidate to come. So it's going to be interesting. And then we're also approving our new charter amendment. So hopefully we at least get a clue. We'll see. And that's probably the chill is lack of participation in the board.
I'm gonna stand up because I've been sitting at my desk all day. Sandra Bishop, Jefferson West Side Neighbors, Vice Chair, and I live in Southeast Neighbors. neighborhood in the south. So, trying to think of what's going on in the west side. The thrill would be that we have the groundbreaking for 80 units of low-income housing on 13th there. So that's a pretty big deal. And personally, I'm heading up the disaster preparedness committee for Jefferson West Side. And if you've ever tried to organize disaster preparedness in a neighborhood with that many renters, it's like it's a real big deal to be making progress. And one of the things we're doing is we're starting with some of the multi-unit apartment buildings. Because a lot of these people, they can't just put a okay or help sign in the window because you can't see their windows from the ground. So anyway, that's going really well. The chill side of it is we have major problems with illegal camping. Usually young males, 20 to 30, I'm on the board because I still own property there. We have an old 1890s building, it's got 5 apartments in it. Now I have people camping in front and I just go up and say, what are you doing? You can't camp here, and they move. But some people actually been prevented from leaving their house from guys this age camping in front of the house. So it's a real problem. So, cities trying to help with it, and mostly we get pretty good responses, but that's definitely not a pleasant thing. But I'm really glad to be here and really looking forward to the presentation.
Excellent. Well, and John Belcher,
Sorry, I'm
John,
late.
thank you. Who you are, who you're with, what you do, chilling at the row.
Okay, I am on the board of a River Community Organization with Jan and Beth. Been doing this forever and thrill and a chill. The thrill, I think, is we have a really active board more than we've had for quite a while. You may have already heard that. The chill is we're having a little bit of a challenge with our navigation center in our neighborhood, and we're working with the city and the county and the folks who are running the navigation center, and I hope we can resolve it quickly.
What's the navigation center?
The navigation center is a low barrier system set up by the county and the city. They could take in people who are chronically unhoused, if they've been unhoused for at least half of the past 2 years. And there are reasons why they are unhoused, so they are working with the more challenging of the unhoused to get them into a place where they can get better together and hopefully find their way back to permanent housing.
Is that on Garfield or?
No, it's on River Avenue, which is just south of Beltline.
It's the old Dad's building.
John, what was it called again?
The River Avenue Navigation Center.
Still that building?
It was the old vet building, yeah.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Just quick reminder, restrooms, you would go through that conference room and they are just on the right. So 1952, which is the year of Jan's birth. Yay. And please come grab a snack. Come grab a snack, you guys.
Yeah, it's not snacks, it's real food.
It's real food. And there's cold drinks in the little refrigerator there and some apple cider or apple juice right here. We even have chocolate. And I'm really grateful that several of you talked about some of your events, because our next fireside chat is really going to be focusing on events and how you all promote them and get folks there. So we'll talk more about that later, but now I'm going to pass the torch over to Leah and her group. And welcome and thank you for being here. We're really looking forward to hearing more.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Julian. Thank you all for being here and for inviting us to join, I think, the first fireside
It's
chat.
the first
is that
fireside
right?
chat.
We're excited to be the first guest. Yeah, my name's Leah. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I assume people can hear me, even though it's not their computer, right?
Yes, because it's not muted
Yes.
here.
Well, in the room, I'm sure. Cool. I'm gonna talk a little bit about urban growth strategies. I will do kind of a project overview and then hand it off to Thea and Zoli to talk about a component of that, which is our land use designation map. Just sent it's kind of spoiler alert that we just sent out a lot of postcards citywide, so it might be something that you're hearing about in your neighborhoods. And then I'll wrap up by talking about centers and climate friendly areas. So these are the two kind of hot topics within this multi-year long planning process. We'll do some Q&A after that, and then right at about the halfway point, we'll try and wrap that piece up, and then I'll hand it off to Jeff to talk about housing options, do his presentation, and then same thing, we'll do Q&A on the content he has, and make sure to get you out of here before 7:30. So with that, I'm gonna jump right in. Many of you may have been involved in your neighborhoods when we did Envision Eugene about a decade or so ago. That was the last time that Eugene did an analysis of our urban growth boundary. So urban growth strategies is kind of our next run at that, and we'll actually be doing this every 8 years now moving forward. So it'll be a much more regular process of looking at our urban land needs and how we're planning for the next 20 years for housing, for jobs, and for other urban uses like parks, schools, and infrastructure. So urban growth strategies will be kind of a 3-year long process where we're looking at all of those urban land needs. Do we have enough land within our current urban growth boundary to accommodate 20 years of growth? And if not, the next step in the process would be looking at UGB expansion, which for some of your neighborhoods might be pretty relevant if you're kind of on the edges of the city. There's a lot of work products that are going to come out of this, and we'll talk through each of those and the project phases together. So just briefly, the goals for urban growth strategies, there's several of them, but I'll just read through them quickly. First, to, of course, advance Eugene's vision for a community where people at all income levels can afford to live, work, shop, and play. To facilitate the production of more housing and move Eugene towards more fair and equitable housing outcomes. To support data-informed policy decisions about urban area growth, including when to expand the urban growth boundary. And then to provide meaningful opportunities. Next slide. For community members to inform how Eugene plans for growth. To center the voices and experiences of people from underserved communities in decision-making. And then to comply with relevant state statutes and administrative rules. For those of you who have been involved in this for a while or were around for Envision Eugene, you probably know that how we do urban growth planning in Oregon is very managed by state law, by state mandates. And so there's a pretty prescribed process that we have to follow at a local level. But in addition to kind of following our state rules for land use planning, this body of work will also advance a lot of the city's existing priorities and the city council's priorities. So just a few, part of this work will be completing our Eugene specific comprehensive plan. So that's the Envision Eugene comprehensive plan. And that again has kind of the policies that guide long-term growth in our community. We also have the housing implementation pipeline, which is a 5-year action plan for how Eugene can support housing production as well as provide solutions for homelessness. Their climate action plan, a lot of this connects to the compact development element of the climate action plan 2.0, where we're looking at how we can reduce emissions from transportation specifically by growing more compactly, creating neighborhoods where people can walk and bike and choose other options. And then certainly advances components of the city council's strategic plan that we was approved in late 2022. So this is a really simplistic way to look at urban growth planning. It really is, I've mentioned, we have to plan for 20 years of urban land uses within our urban growth boundary. So kind of at the end of the formula is that 20-year need. Again, we want to look at all of the types of uses together. So we're looking at housing, we're looking at land for jobs, we're looking at parks, schools, infrastructure, and all of those things that make a complete neighborhood and a complete city. To understand if we have enough land within our urban growth boundary, we look at a few things. So we assess our current land supply. How much land do we have? How much is developable? What can we expect out of our current land supply? We look at what are called efficiency measures, which are ways that we can grow more efficiently on the land that we already have, growing more compactly, taking policy measures to do that. And then if those two things together are still not enough land to accommodate our 20 years of growth, that's when we look at UGB expansion. And so this process is what is pretty prescribed by the state. We have to do that kind of analysis of our current land, and we have to look at growing more efficiently before we can consider UGB expansion. So taking all that and kind of all of the work we're looking to accomplish in the next few years, we broke out the components into several project phases. So the first phase that I'll talk a little bit about is looking at Eugene's needs and priorities specifically for housing. The state is changing how we do housing planning locally. So this will be a pretty comprehensive look at our housing needs. We study what land is needed for jobs, housing, parks, schools, and infrastructure. So it's a little bit more of like the bean counting of our current land supply, what we can expect out of it and what we need. And then kind of the policy outcomes. So based on what we learned in technical analysis and through engagement, we're updating and developing regulations, guidelines, and maps for using land in Eugene, which we'll talk about a couple specific instances of. The future work that comes after we do all this analysis is the potential urban growth boundary expansion. We won't have the, concrete answer of yes or no, do we need to expand and where and for how much and for what uses for another year and a half. But we know, given our community's pretty severe housing needs, as many of you mentioned, that we will likely need to expand for housing in the near future. So just to run through those phases in a little bit more detail, so needs and priorities for housing. There's kind of two components of this. So we are working on what's called the housing production strategy. It's a new component of this work. I mentioned the state is kind of changing and putting down new rules for how we do this. The housing production strategy will be an 8-year action plan that the council adopts that identifies lots of different actions, whether they be incentives, policies, removing regulatory barriers, ways that we can encourage housing production, housing affordability, and housing choice for folks across our community. We've been doing quite a bit of engagement over the summer, talking to people about their housing needs and priorities, and then looking at what levers the city has to pull to encourage that housing production and affordability. So that'll be one of the first pieces we were working on. I mentioned briefly those efficiency measures. So those are policy changes that we can make to grow more efficiently on the land that we already have. So there's a lot of overlap between the housing production work and these efficiency measures. So that's where we're kind of actively focusing to come up with what those actions are and start doing engagement around them so we can bring them to council for adoption in 2026. The next phase is that technical analysis of land needs. I'm not going to get into it in a ton of detail, other than to say that technical analysis work is queued up to be kind of in front of council and adopted in 2027. So we'll be looking at our housing capacity and kind of the bean counting for our current land supply and what we need. We'll look at land for jobs, and then we'll look at land for our other urban uses. So talking to the utility providers about what infrastructure needs they might have, talking to the school districts about their growth needs over the next 20 years, talking to parks about growth in our parks and open space across the board. A lot of that is grounded in what's called our buildable lands inventory, which Thea manages, that looks at, again, that current land supply and what we can expect in terms of development for differently designated land across the city. One thing I'll just note here is, again, on the housing planning component, this, as I said, the state is really changing how we do this, and they're pretty significantly changing how we calculate our need for housing over the next 20 years. So this is called the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, which if you've seen Governor Kotek has put out a lot in terms of a priority of her office to do housing production. So this has been one of the things that came out of that push for more housing. And it really changes how cities can plan for housing. In the past, we only planned for population growth. We said, how much are we gonna grow in population in the next 20 years? Okay, that's what we're gonna plan for in terms of housing. This new approach really recognizes that we've had decades of underproduction of housing. We have a significant homelessness crisis in our community and across the West Coast. So we're actually gonna incorporate that really current and stark need into our land supply planning and make sure that we're taking a more comprehensive look at what our housing need is locally, not just population growth, but are we meeting the needs of our current residents and folks in Eugene? All that to say, we'll be planning for a lot more housing than we have in the past, which will impact kind of this larger body of work. And the last piece, the last phase are really what are the kind of policy outcomes? How does this show up in our plans and our policies and our guiding documents? So we are working to complete the Eugene specific comprehensive plan. So this is phase 2 of that. We only have a partially adopted comprehensive plan right now. So we're adopting 6 new chapters. And let's see if I can list them. So they're community engagement, which we're working closely with OECE on, compact development and urban design, housing, our land use chapter, which goes with what they and Zoe you're going to talk about here in a minute, and community health, which is a new chapter for us, certainly relevant to a lot of the conversations that are happening around public health and the relation between kind of land use and public health. We're working on those policies. We're also working on a map that supports our comprehensive plan and how land is designated, which again, Thea and Zoe will talk about. And then we expect all of this work to also result in changes to our other guiding plans, our land use code, to actually implement these new actions, these new policies that we want to move forward. So that's kind of the big picture overview. I'm going to hand it off to Zoe to talk a little, and Thea to talk a little bit about one component of that, which is the land use designation map.
Yeah.
You want us to hold our questions till the very end?
Yeah, we're almost done.
So as Leah mentioned, in moving towards the Eugene specific comprehensive plan, part of that is taking what is called the plan diagram, the metropolitan plan diagram, and making that Eugene specific as well. So what we currently have is an 11 by 17 inch map that is both Eugene and Springfield. And it was last updated in 2004, so about 20 years ago. And it is the key component you need to know about this is it is only valid at that 11 by 17 inch scale. So you cannot zoom into the map. You can't blow it up. You have to use it at that scale. So what we are trying to do with this project is to make it Eugene specific and really to modernize the map. So we're moving from PDF to a digital map where it will be zoomable, searchable, and we'll know exactly where the boundaries between all of the different designations sit. So we're calling it the land use designation map, but it's also, it can be known as plan designations. And they're like a high level 20-year look at how we want the land to be used. It's similar to zoning, but it's not nearly as specific as zoning, and it doesn't dictate what has to happen specifically, what types of uses are allowed. That's all zoning. So yeah, really, we're just trying to figure out where those boundaries are between the different land use designations, make it much more user friendly. And Zoe's going to go into a specific example of what we call where we said the boundary was, and how we clarified that.
This kind of describes like our general process. So we started with the Metro Plan diagram, that PDF 11 by 17. So this image right here, you can't use actually because it's larger than 11 by 17. And so started here with the Metro Plan diagram, we digitized or used a digitized version of that. And so that's that middle image. And so you can see here, this is an example of Spring Boulevard in South Eugene. And the UGB actually covers these properties. And Spring Boulevard too now extends further south because this is from 2004. It's not been updated. And so we flagged a ton of different properties. I don't know how many we started off with, like somewhere in the thousands. And reviewed all of those. And so this is an example of where these properties on the digital version, they were shown as being designated for parks and open space. And then when we dug into researching them, we looked at refinement plan diagrams, we went through old past land use applications and decisions that had been made, and we found with these, they were through a series of annexation requests. Yes, they were shown to be designated for low density residential, and so that wasn't reflected in that digital version, because when you stretch a PDF, there's some distortion that happens. So we went through meticulously, and then, yeah, we ended up with that image on the far right, and so that is the land use designation map, the draft version that we have, and that's available on our website, which is, yeah, on City of Eugene. Happy to tell you that after. And we just sent out 5,600 postcards to properties where this clarification work happened. And so a lot of times it's mostly just these tiny little slivers that were coming on that digitized version. And so we just made sure that the property lines, or not the property lines, the designations match. Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else. We also included, I think there was like, yeah, over 20 plus Metro Plan amendments that haven't been reflected on the PDF, so those are updated.
Modernizing is the word, project. And I just have a couple more slides and then we'll go to your questions, about kind of this whole body of work, including the land use designation map. We're doing a lot of community engagement over the 3 years of this project. We started by doing kind of some general engagement this summer. We were at some of the neighborhood events. We did a bunch of kind of targeted outreach. We have an approved community engagement plan that the Planning Commission approved back in February of this year. That continues to evolve as we learn more about the project and kind of find specific needs to do outreach. But of course, we're already always doing kind of our general, broad community citywide outreach. We had a big open house in June of this year, doing virtual info sessions on various topics. We had a survey and a mapping activity, going to city boards and commissions, and of course neighborhood associations, and then continuing to always share information through our website and our newsletter. And then also looking at more targeted outreach. So we're going to launch next year an equity advisory panel to support some of this work. And that's a specific requirement that comes out of our equity focused engagement. It's a specific requirement to some of this kind of state mandated work. Going to community and cultural events. We did quite a bit of that this summer. Some targeted listening sessions, working groups with housing and development professionals, social events. So that's just kind of starting that work. We'll be continuing to do this work engagement through end of 2025 as the policies kind of get refined further. This first year was pretty high level, I would say, talking to people about their housing needs and priorities, and then their interest in what we would call kind of mixed use centers. So for those of you who have been paying attention to planning work in recent years, these kind of concept of 20-minute neighborhoods and centers where you can kind of get everything you need within a short distance of your home. It's something we've been talking about for a long time in Eugene. This is one strategy to grow more compactly, right? I talked about kind of the climate impacts of our planning work. This has been a part of Eugene's vision for many years, to have more kind of centers across the community where people can access goods and services, go to restaurants and cafes, do your shopping in places kind of closer to your home. So this has been in our, as said, in our vision for a while. We are intending for these mixed use centers to be convenient, to help us be a more climate friendly community, have more connected neighborhoods, but also have centers that feel comfortable and are safe and are appropriate for kind of the size and the context of the community. So we're looking at centers that are actually a range of sizes, from our kind of most dense, intense, like a downtown center, to more commercial centers like Oakway, or like at Willamette and 29th, right, where you have kind of a high concentration of commercial uses already, to more neighborhood centers, so smaller scale places that are kind of neighborhood size, think about like the Whitaker or Friendly Gardens area. As good examples of where you're getting kind of that mixture of uses that attract folks within the neighborhood to get there, to gather, and to come together. One type of center that I just want to talk a little bit about because it's relevant right now, are what are called climate friendly areas. So this is a specific type of center, but these are directed by state administrative rules. So the state has required that larger cities designate these climate friendly areas. It really is an attempt by the state to kind of marry zoning, right? What the land uses are with transportation improvements. And again, really trying to encourage places that you can get around without relying on a car, walk, bike, take the bus to get what you need. So by designating a climate friendly area, we'll actually zone these areas for higher density and a mixed use development. So housing, non-auto oriented and public serving uses. And then we'll identify and prioritize improvements that make it easier and safer for people to walk, bike, and take the transit to their destinations. And then we'll also look at any strategies we need to implement to avoid or minimize housing displacement for vulnerable residents. Unfortunately, CFA designation does not come with any funding to do that work. So it is a designation, but it would require additional funding to actually make those transportation improvements or provide financial incentives to kind of encourage the type of development we want to see. So it really is at this point a zoning tool, unless or until council funds additional or provides additional resources to make those transportation improvements or to provide financial incentives for mixed use development. This climate friendly areas designation is going to council this year to get initial direction to staff. So we've gone to the planning commission a couple of times to do work sessions with them over the summer and fall. And staff, based on technical analysis through a CFA study, looking at the requirements of the state, and then also doing an analysis of redevelopment potential in different areas across the city. We proposed 3 different options. So the first option was to kind of focus on downtown and just meet our minimum state requirements, do kind of the least that we would have to do, designate the least amount of area while focusing kind of on downtown. Option 2 would build out from there, designate a few more areas, and we focus that on kind of what the most promising areas for mixed use, higher density development was. And then our option 3 was kind of the most expansive, building on that and looking at some of our key corridors across the city, but knowing that those areas would require some additional investment and resources to actually get a climate friendly level development. So I'm not going to go through all of the different areas in a lot of detail tonight. I'm certainly happy to answer questions or send follow-up resources. But I will say that the planning commission made a recommendation to city council, and we'll be going to city council in November to get some direction to staff. The planning commission kind of recommended the middle road. So doing more than the state minimum requirements, but also trying to be, I think, realistic about where we could expect this like higher intensity development and where the market may exist to actually support mixed use higher density. So the areas that are included in option 2 are basically greater downtown, and then our currently zoned commercial areas around Lower Clover Road, Valley River Center, South Willamette, and Santa Clara Station. And I did want to show you all zoning maps, which I know is not the most fun thing for everyone to look at, but just to give you a sense, these are draft maps. They are not the final boundaries, and they kind of generally follow contiguous zoning that is kind of in alignment with what climate friendly areas are intended to be. So this first area map on the left is greater downtown. And you can see it kind of follows the boundary of the pink zoning, which is our community commercial zoning, which already allows for higher density mixed uses. So it will need very, very small tweaks to the zoning to actually get it to comply with climate friendly areas. The red in the center is major commercial, so that's like our downtown core, already allows for it. And then the orange is, high density residential. So we're seeing a lot of housing development. So actually changing that area to allow for some commercial uses. So there's more services for the folks who are living in some of that high density housing. On the right is Lower Coburg Road. Again, you'll see this follows the existing C2 community commercial zoning. It already allows for a very high intensity of both housing and commercial uses. Similarly, these are the three other kind of commercial nodes we looked at and are recommended to City Council. So on the left is Santa Clara Station. Again, this follows the C2 commercial zoning. South Willamette, and it's just looking at that commercial node right at 29th, and then the Valley River Center area. So again, these are draft boundaries. We'll be doing more technical analysis and refinement next year on all of this and community engagement, but we want council to give us kind of a high level direction of where we should be looking, help us to narrow down the areas that will possibly receive this designation. The final decision making and adoption won't happen until 2026. So this is just our initial direction for the council. I'm almost done here. Just quickly, some of the opportunities and constraints and kind of why we looked at these areas for CFA designation. Again, these are existing commercial centers. They will require very few changes to the existing zoning and code. In these areas, they basically already function, at least from the zoning level as climate friendly areas. Many of these areas are already well served by parks and public amenities, which is an important part of climate friendly areas designation. As I said, it's kind of that middle ground. So we're doing a little bit more than our state minimum requirements, but it's not the most expansive version we looked at. And many of these are on key corridors that are targeted for some transit improvements. So River Road, Lower Coburg Road are areas that city's already looking at, LTD is already looking at in terms of transit improvements. Some of the constraints, not all of these areas are yet well positioned to support higher density mixed use development. The market might not be there in all of these places, but we hope that with more funding, with looking at other financial tools as a part of our housing planning, there are some opportunities to pull some other policy levers in conjunction with CFA designation. Certainly, some of these areas still need some improvements to active transportation and transit service. Again, that's part of this process of designation is looking at those gaps and opportunities. But certainly, as you all know, requires some funding to actually make those construction projects happen. Valley River Center in particular would need some additional analysis and looking at malls developed very differently than more neighborhood scale development, but we know there's some opportunities and a lot of undeveloped land out there with parking lots. And then Santa Clara Station will be a little bit different. We just made some changes as a part of the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood planning to the C2 zoned properties in that area. So we have some options, but retaining the changes that have been made while still doing the climate friendly areas designation. And we can talk in more detail about what that looks like. So with that, a couple next steps and then we'll get questions. I mentioned we're going to council with this on November 13th. This one they'll be taking up climate friendly areas at their work session. I think that's a Wednesday midday session. And then on December 10th, we'll be going to the Eugene Planning Commission for a work session on the comprehensive plan work and specifically the land use designation map. And then 2025, there's lots more coming with this, lots more specific opportunities to engage on this work. I'm gonna stop because I've talked for a long time. And we'll go to questions from you all, and then we'll hand it off to Jeff to talk about housing. Yes.
So you're mentioning like Valley River Center and Oakway. Are you thinking of like building residential on top of the malls or like in the parking area?
Both would be an opportunity. So that's currently allowed under the code there. What we would call like vertical mixed use development where you have commercial on the ground floor and housing above it, or horizontal mixed use where you have it side by side. Both would be allowed under the current zoning and both would be, I think, encouraged under climate friendly areas designation. vertical mixed use where you have like commercial on the first floor and housing above is more expensive to build. So it tends to not always be feasible, to see it happen, but certainly something we want to encourage. Yeah.
I'm also on the MUFTI board,
Yeah.
actually, for downtown area, so it's, I know they're considering extending the MUFTI boundaries, would that be these primary peak areas that you're talking about?
Possibly. Council hasn't made any sort of direction on like where they would want to extend MUFTI to, but I think this would be something they'd consider. Is areas with this designation, but it's unlikely, I think, that they would extend it to all of these areas, at least right away, just because of the funding required to do that. But certainly a consideration. Yep.
So I appreciate the work you're doing on this for planning for the future. As you identified, we're in crisis right now. So I realize part of the planning is figuring out, how much can we fit here and there, but as you're doing it, you're also, I assume, kind of coming up with some of the ways that you will implement this, of getting the density.
Yes.
So as you're going along, is there any effort to present things to council, like, we know we're gonna need this in our toolkit, like pre-approved plans or incentives to convert parking lots to housing? Are you going to council and saying, why don't you just go ahead and do this now? With any of that stuff?
Yeah, those are the types of actions that will be included in the housing production strategy, which is that 8-year work plan that I mentioned to address our housing needs. That will need to be adopted by council. But it'll be just like what you're saying. It could be things like extending MUFTI to new places. It could be incentives for parking lot redevelopment. It could be other financial tools that we have, removing regulatory barriers in plans and code. It could include that whole menu.
But there's some of those things that are like, they're very low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That I would think that you could just say, well, we could do that now.
And I'll touch base on something.
Okay.
Yes, but I will just say, in addition to what Jeff's gonna talk about, we have our housing implementation pipeline, which is kind of what we can do with our current resources and what are at the top of the list right now in terms of affordable housing and shelter and things like that. So that plan guides us right now, and then we'll look at the next, 8 years with the housing production strategy. I'm not sure whose hands were
Yes,
first. Maybe Cindy, you can help me with this next.
Oh, is that-
Okay.
okay. I'm just wondering why Bethel wasn't considered again.
That's a great question. The climate friendly areas designation specifically is very high intensity, high density. So it looks at, you can allow up to 10-story development. It has minimum residential densities, so we're looking at a pretty high intensity of kind of a mixed use center. So we looked for places that kind of already have some of that zoning.
What we need.
Yes, I hear you. We wanted to introduce that broader centers concept where we're talking about multiple scales. Because that's like the Eugene version and a broader framework than what the climate friendly areas are, which are very like prescribed by the state. So with the broader centers work, we definitely are looking at Bethel and looking at all of the neighborhoods to look at where should we be designating neighborhood centers, some of that like smaller scale commercial, neighborhood scale commercial. And then what are the tools we have to do that, whether that be through zoning or incentives, transportation improvements, things like
Okay, as
that.
long as we're not forgotten.
Definitely. And I'm bringing a version of this. I'm bringing a version of this presentation to the Bethel neighborhood planning in a couple of weeks. And we'll talk about that more expansively at that meeting for sure.
I love the idea of building on parking lots. I've been in Barcelona and I've seen kids playing soccer and people chilling out in a park-like setting with trees in a place that used to be an automobile intersection. It's called super blocks, super islands. Look it up on YouTube. I mean, we're not Barcelona, but what I want to mention is that some number of years ago that predates me being in Eugene and probably predates just about everybody here. It would have happened in Eugene in the 80s. The city of Eugene pursued an idea called block planning. Do you know anything about block planning?
Block planning is not ringing any bells for me.
I've read about it in the refinement plan.
It's time to dust off block planning. There's a guy who told me all about it because he was the city's advisor. His name was Mike Peace. He's an architect and a planner, and I'm not even sure if Mike is even still alive. But he was retained by the city and he worked with several neighborhoods. Block planning is when neighbors come together and they make a plan to make better use of a block. It doesn't make the regulations go away, but the block can become something like a planned unit development, and regulations become a lot more elastic in terms of setbacks, in terms of solar, parking, traffic. The place in Eugene that's the closest to an example of block planning, although it's not really a block plan, is East Blair Housing Co-op. And they've done some awesome stuff because East Blair controls about 8 properties. It's about 8 or 9 properties. East Blair, everybody needs to go check out East Blair. It's not perfect for every location, but what they've been able to do is because the co-op manages a number of properties, they can synchronize the properties and make much better use of the space. And neighbors, any group of neighbors could do the same thing. And the whole idea is to densify, to make it more walkable, to make it more safe for kids, for adults, small businesses, to make better use of existing space. I would love to see also the idea of the city doing a survey and find out how many bedrooms there are. We don't have a shortage of bedrooms. I rent 3 rooms in my house. I should get a tax break on my county taxes. There should be encouragement for people to make better use of their own properties. And that's making use of something that's already there. I could go on. And I want to mention that I brought these posters that are free, and they're a permaculture look at exactly what we're talking about, and they're here for anybody who wants to take them. Thanks.
Go ahead, Sam. So I'm just trying to understand the timelines of.
Yeah.
So you're talking about urban growth strategies. It sounds like it's taking the place of what used to be the old 5-year updates for the metro plan. And you're saying the metro plan, at least the diagram hasn't been updated since 2004.
Yeah.
I assume the plan hasn't been updated. I know a lot of the local jurisdictions don't pay much attention at all to what's in the metro plan. But you said it's a 3-year long process. So when does it start?
Yeah, great question. So we started urban growth strategies broadly at the beginning of 2024.
Okay, so
we're kind of-
2024 would be the first year?
Yeah.
We expect to be through.
Our first kind of adoption package work that we'll be bringing to council will be 2026. We'll have some more that we bring to them in 2027.
But so it takes 2 years to get something to council, so you start it in 2024. And then council doesn't act on anything until 2026. What are they gonna be, what kind of things are they gonna be acting on?
So in 2026, we'll be asking them to adopt a few things or initiate the adoption process. So we'll be asking them to adopt a housing production strategy, which is that 8-year action plan. We'll be asking them to adopt some of those land use efficiency measures, which are policy changes to help us grow more compactly. And we'll be asking them to adopt several new chapters of the Eugene specific comprehensive plan, as well as the land use designation map. So that we are slowly moving out of the metro plan into our own Eugene specific comprehensive plan. We do still use the metro plan for a lot of things. Jeff can testify to this. He looks at the metro plan all the time.
That's
But
my guy.
both Eugene and Springfield are working their way out of the metro plan over
They got it.
many years. Yes. So this is like the next big swing at moving into our Eugene specific plan and getting ourselves out of at least more pieces of the metro plan. We won't be 100% done in 2026, but we'll be almost there.
So if it's an 8-year plan, does it ever get adopted and then an 8-year timeframe starts, or does it just keep rolling? Because I've been in Eugene for a long time. I finally had to recycle all the Eugene plans. I couldn't do the re-engineering of my upstairs to hold the weight. So, I mean, joking aside, there have been a lot of plans.
Yep.
And a lot of times the plans get shelved. And so now it's, at least the plans were started, they were completed. And then you had a plan, but I'm trying to understand this new process. So if it's an 8-year plan and the city council is adopting a few things in 26, when does the plan get adopted?
I think, am I right in saying that it's 11 years really is what you're talking about, correct?
Not
3 years to get there and then
Yeah,
8 years
so we are
past that.
8 years. The state is saying we have to analyze our urban growth boundary every 8 years, specifically for housing needs. So every 8 years, we'll be doing this technical analysis and refreshing it for the next 20 years. So it is more getting back to that like periodic refreshing and review. That is kind of foundational to the statewide land use planning program. So we'll be doing this again in 8 more years. So we're hoping it becomes more efficient, more effective now that we're on kind of this regular cycle. The housing production strategy in particular is an 8-year plan. The other work that we're doing is always a 20-year look. So we're always doing a 20-year look at our urban growth needs. The 8-year action plan will get refreshed every time we do the UGB analysis. So there's a lot of plans that we're lumping into one bigger project, which is admittedly, it's hard to track all the timelines. But 2026 is when we'll be adopting this first swing of plans, and then 8 years, every 8 years after that, we'll refresh and do the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So just a little bit off topic. So my friend owns Play. And Play is a new social place that's that they opened up across the street from pretty close to where the jail is downtown.
Yeah.
And she and I got in an argument and she told me it's in the Whitaker. I'm like, no, absolutely not. You're not in the Whitaker, you're in downtown. So I went in there the day, I went in there to see her new place and all of that. And she went upstairs and brought me a map downstairs. And I'll be darned if it doesn't say urban growth boundary or something along those lines, that it is in the Whitaker neighborhood. So can you explain to me what happened, when that happened, what that means?
Downtown goes to Lincoln, I believe.
Right, but it's past there.
Yeah, I know, it's on.
But it is, it is in Whitaker, and the only way she can have batting cages is because she has a Whitaker address.
So would that be?
Because it's not zoned
So-
for
Yeah.
downtown.
So my guess would be that there may be a difference between the Whitaker neighborhood area, and I'm using that to say like your neighborhood association area versus the Whitaker area plan, which is that 1988 plan.
So where, cause I've looked online,
So,
I've went to the city website, I have tried to find a copy of that.
I'd be happy to work through Cindy to get you a copy of that plan.
Thank you.
That'll show you that, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's quite possible they're different.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Associations.
No. Hi, it sounds like, thank you for all of this. This is nice. It sounds like the state is giving us a lot of regulations or new ways of thinking about things. I was wondering, and this is not meant to be snotty at all, but like if you have all of these regulations and rules and everything, what can we as a neighborhood suggest? Like, is there any room for anything from us? I mean, I'm.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a fair question. The process is prescribed, but what we actually do in terms of the actions that we take, I think there's a lot of room for community involvement, community engagement in that. We're not quite to the place where we're like starting to bring strategies or policies for you to respond to quite yet. We're in that initial data gathering, information gathering phase. But a lot of that will happen in 2025 where we say like, here's kind of what we're thinking for actions to support housing production and affordability. what do you think? What did we miss? Where are there more opportunities to do more? There will be those efficiency measures I talked about, so that'll definitely come out to the community to say, here's kind of what we're thinking. We'll do lots of work sessions with the planning commission, lots of specific ways to engage. This is citywide planning in scale, so we is not like a neighborhood planning effort specifically. We are looking across the city to look at our entire urban growth, boundary and our entire land supply and how we're growing citywide. So it will be citywide in scale.
The work
vast
parties would
majority.
be citywide, not breaking it down into.
The actions and kind of policies themselves will be primarily citywide in nature. They could be restricted to like a specific zone, right? We're looking at this type of residential. But for the most part, this is citywide in scale. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of the time. It's 6:45. We're still going to hear a little bit about housing. So, and a council meeting coming up at 7:30. So in about 15 minutes, if anybody wants to sign up, that's a good time to get over there and get your name on the list. John, with 2 over there, and then sign up to yourself. And then, okay. John.
So I have been a planning commissioner for 11 years. And I've worked on our River Road Santa Clara plan for 7 years. And I don't have a question, but some advice. In my time in the planning commission many years ago, we actually tried to do this sort of thing for something called nodal development.
Yep.
And we spent a lot of time designating areas, planning them. And then the city council decided, because one of them read an article somewhere, that nodal development would not work unless you had a floor area ratio of 2.0. That means that if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you'd have to have a 20,000 square foot building on it to get to that ratio. Staff or that counselor looked at what the current floor area ratio is for these nodes that they were trying to redevelop. It would have required a doubling of the square footage in each of those nodes in order to meet this new requirement. And guess what? None of them ever got developed. In the neighborhood plan that we just terminated, we were trying to create a lot of the things you're talking about here. But when the neighbors pointed out that the configuration of our lots would not fit the type of development that we had been planning for, the neighborhood plan basically fell apart. We didn't have the floor area ratio. So lessons learned. When people come up with ideas on how to develop a certain area, look at the actual existing conditions on the ground and see whether or not they are feasible. I've, in my 11 years as a planning commissioner, helped make lots of those plans, and Sandra talks about sitting on the shelf that went absolutely nowhere. I don't want to see that happen again. So the last piece is talk to the people who live there, ask them about whether things are feasible or not. And when they give you challenges, don't say, oh, they're being negative. Listen to them. Thank you.
Yes, that, you're right.
Well, mine's a little related to John's in that, the River Road Community Organization, Santa Clara Community Organization worked with the city in developing our neighborhood plan. And there are a number of action items on that plan to be implemented. So my question for you is, how does that fit in with the work that you're doing, and what opportunities do neighbors that work as John did for 7 years on the neighborhood plan have to give input in terms of the final product that you're working toward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that there are likely a lot of actions that can be moved forward from the neighborhood plan through this urban growth strategy work. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there's a lot of actions in the plan. And I know where city is working with you all to try and identify those kind of top actions to move forward sooner than later. And I think the best vehicle to move those actions forward is identify, a planning process where they can get dropped in, right? So I think there are a lot of opportunities. A lot of what came out of the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood planning is relevant, and the policy approach and intent is very similar to what we're trying to look at citywide. So yeah, I think there's some great opportunities. Like I said, we are not at the place where we're bringing out like specific policies for people to react to yet. But I imagine we'll be doing that in early to mid 2025. And then we'll be rolling out a lot of different components of this for folks to react to. So definitely committed to working with Cindy and Julian in this office to make sure neighborhood associations are involved and have lots of opportunities to comment. And there will be a lot of engagement opportunities next year to stay involved with.
Hey, Jeff?
Yeah, so you mentioned, oh, thank you once again for all the work everyone's doing, because these are pretty changing, complicated problems all too. Transportation specifics, the CFA specific.
Yep.
How close are you working with the Department of Transportation and LTD, and how does that factor into places like Santa Clara and South Carolina?
Yeah, we're working closely with our transportation planning staff and the Public Works Department and LTD. What they will take on, so they've kind of been an integral part of kind of our initial study to getting to this narrowing stage. And then they will actually be doing the transportation gap analysis. So once we identify generally the areas that council is interested in designating, they will do a transportation gap analysis, will include LTD in that work to say, what are the gaps in the walking, biking, transit networks that needs to be addressed and prioritized. Those will eventually get adopted into our transportation system plan, which they're planning on a major update to in the next handful of years. So those will get put into kind of the specific project list.
Thanks.
Quick one on that. Is it possible to take some of the larger parking areas that are like on Seneca where they have industrial property, where they got a huge parking lot and allow them with some kind of a tax thing, the tax brand, whatever, to be able to build above their parking lot and have housing up there so they can have an employee that's close to work rather than driving all the way across town and going to daycare to drop off their kid and then going back, so they could live right within walking distance to the job perhaps. And they would get preferential housing because they work right there. But then they have other places because you've got all these parking lots that in town that are just one level instead of being able to multi-use and just say, well, look, it's your property. But if you let us build on your property with an easement, whatever, then we can go up a couple of stories and we may be able to have housing for your employees, but they don't have to live in Springfield and drive all the way, less congestion of Beltline and all that.
Yeah, that's certainly incentives to redevelop parking lots are definitely something we've heard about and something we'll be considering as a part of this process. Something that allows us to do that is we made some recent changes through the climate friendly and equitable communities or CFEC rules that came down from the state a couple of years ago, where we removed minimum parking requirements, off-street parking requirements for new development. So it used to be that, the city regulated, you have to have parking spots. Now that we've removed those regulations, I think there's a lot more opportunity to potentially redevelop some of that parking. Certainly still costs money, but tax incentives are one way we can look at that for sure.
Thank you. I
Yes, I want to make sure we go.
Jeff Gepper has some time.
Good job.
Great questions, great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Truly, the amount of work that they're undertaking is incredible. And I'm sorry, I was a former teacher. I can't help but stand. This is just what I do. And I also talk with my hand a lot. So, yeah, we're gonna do that. A lot of what was just talked about was, whether it's rules coming down from the state, whether it's the local planning processes, whatever is going on. The reality on the ground is that we need more housing, right? And so what I'm gonna talk about today is just one piece in that puzzle. And so I wanna make sure that it's really clear is that, when we talk about the housing implementation pipeline or the housing production strategies that are being developed, the housing options is just one small piece of creating more dwelling units. I'm not talking about creating more affordable dwelling units. I'm not talking about creating income or subsidized units. Today, I'm just talking about let's build houses and make housing easier in Eugene. Now, a lot of this work was predicated or really handed down to us by the state. But what we also heard during this process through our public engagement was make housing easier in Eugene. Give us more housing. give people places to live. And so a lot of the options that are kind of now on people's table is really coming out of all that hard work, whether it was from the public engagement or whether it was these mandates that did come down from the state to make sure that we could allow more housing. So, and expanding.
I got it.
Okay, that should work now.
So. The housing options that I'm gonna talk about today were mostly and importantly happening within our low density residential areas. And that's because our high density and our medium density areas, they allow, high density housing. You can already go build that, right? So while we are working in other ways to reduce barriers to that high density housing, in our low density areas, which is this kind of like really light beige color here, which you notice covers a lot of the city. This is really allowing for more housing occurring in these areas, whether that's through new housing developments or whether that's happening through infill, somebody putting a unit in their backyard or anything like that. It's really trying to generate these potential scenarios where somebody says, okay, I've got one house on a really big lot. What else can I do here to build more houses? So, this is what everybody calls a transect, but nobody knows what that means. Opticos developed it, and it really creates a good visual for just going from like what you imagine a city can look like in the spectrum of housing, right? You start down here at the single unit detached houses, you kind of move through the duplexes, you get the fourplexes, you kind of move upwards until you get into the mid-rise and the apartments, right? And so this is a really useful tool for looking at kind of what the spectrum of housing looks like. But let's look at that in the context of Eugene. So before basically I came and started at the city in 2018. Since then, we've had some pretty tectonic shifts in how we view housing in our low density areas. And you all at the neighborhood levels have probably been hearing about. But really it's the fact that prior to just about 2017, we looked, according to our zoning code, at housing really simply. It was, you said, are you a single unit house? Are you a detached single house? Are you a duplex? Or are you anything else? Whether that's 3 houses on a lot or whether it's 100. We looked at that with the same rules. We said you gotta have high degrees of landscaping, got a whole bunch of parking, building orientation, building articulation. You had all of these things, whether it was 3 units or 500. And so what has happened over the last few years is the state realized that a lot of these localized zoning laws were creating barriers by essentially divvying it up in this really simplified way. Because can anybody picture a duplex in your head in town, in one of your neighborhoods? How many of you just pictured a duplex that's on a corner lot? And that corner lot's about 8,000 square feet. That's because that's the only place you could build a duplex. Okay, so every other lot that's in that block had to be a single family home under our zoning code. So basically, what was happening was we were saying we were kind of outlawing, not truly, because you could still develop it, but under extremely high regulatory scrutiny. So it was really regulating out those other housing types, and it was forcing people to say, build a single family home, which is what a lot of people want. That's great. We're not stopping you from building that. What we're trying to do is create those options for people who want to have that house in the backyard for grandma or grandpa, or they want to put an income unit in their backyard that they can rent out, or a unit in the backyard that they can sell. I'll get to that. So really what we are looking at now is a very broad spectrum with different and more appropriate sized regulations for the types of housing that we have. So it's anything from a single family home with an accessory dwelling unit up to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, townhouses, cottage clusters, and then that, big apartment building that you're imagining. And so I'm going to kind of walk through what each one of these looks like, some of the general design standards that apply to those, and get into a few other details as well. So I think you guys are all familiar with this, single family home, design requirements. The one thing I'll say, building setbacks, lot coverage, building height, those still apply. All right, everything else I'm gonna talk about today, that's your baseline standard. Those things apply. You always have to be set back from a property line unless you're in certain zones. You know, you're gonna have lot coverage and you're gonna have your building can only be so high, right? The other thing I'll say is that I'm gonna be talking very generally tonight. Remember that there are a lot of rules. That's my job is literally navigating this tiny box that I live in, that is the city code. It's only 900 pages long. You can crack it open for a read if you like. But so when I'm talking about these generally, just know that there is a lot more information there, and I'm happy to answer questions about those after. So what came in from the state back in 2017, got implemented in 2022, was accessory dwelling units. Basically, if you have a house, you have to be allowed to build a single or an accessory dwelling unit. Now that accessory dwelling unit has to be 800 square feet, it can only be so high. It has to be a little tiny thing in the backyard or something within your house. So accessory dwelling units, one way to get another unit on your property. That's great. We love to see it. It's mandated by the state, so we're doing it here in Eugene now. Now, here's where we start to get into, let's reframe and reshape the way our brains think about things. So earlier, when you were thinking about that corner lot duplex, was it attached in the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course it was, because that's what we all think of as a duplex. The state said no, and also locally during our public outreach program, we also said no. Whether it was the public involvement that we heard, or whether it was the planning commission weighing in, they said, let's be flexible. So now a duplex is simply defined as 2 units on a lot. I don't care what they look like. 2 dwelling units on a lot, one in the front yard, one in the backyard, 2 side by side, one on top of the other. If it has 2 units, it's a duplex. I know that sounds an awful lot like an accessory dwelling unit, and it does. So maybe just think about building duplexes, right? So the big change that happened though is that the state mandated, they said, any lot that you have a single family residential home on, or you allow one to be on, you also have to allow a duplex. That was a really big mandate by the state. Now, there are some caveats to that. I'll get to those later, but generally speaking, in our low density neighborhoods around Eugene, if it allows a single family house, you can build a duplex. And we can only apply the same rules to that duplex as you can a single unit one. Triplexes, how many units is that? 3, 4plexes, really similar, okay. Triplexes and 4plexes are regulated very similarly. Now, as you scale up in development, what happens? More rules apply. Now you have window coverage requirements, you have building articulation requirements, you have driveway limitations, you have parking area limitations. They're not as restrictive as the ones that apply to apartment buildings, but they are scaled down to kind of more appropriate apply to a triplex or 4plex. Now, this is another type of development that has to be allowed according to state law within our city, within our low density residential neighborhoods. Because Eugene's lot sizes have traditionally been 4,500 square feet or greater, these are allowed in most lots in Eugene. And so that's something just to be aware of. And that's like, you go get a building permit. You don't come to me for a land use permit that's gonna send out notice to the neighbors. We're talking building permits here. You just go build it. 4plexes, cottage clusters, a pretty unique concept. We've only seen a few of these come through so far. These are really trying to, if anybody's familiar with Riversong co-housing or any of those models of where it's like supposed to be tiny houses that have a shared common courtyard area. It's trying to make that a little more accessible. So you have to have small units, they can't be attached, they have to have so many courtyard space for those units. Another one that can be done throughout town, it does need some larger lot sizes to do that. Townhouses, traditionally something that was really difficult to build in Eugene. We had pretty intense regulations. We also had a zone that was specifically for it that was on one property. And so now you can build townhouses in a lot of parts of Eugene. You do have to create the lots for them though. So like there is a little bit more process involved with actually getting to the phase of building townhouses. And there's also a lot more regulations. Like I said, as it scales up, there's more rules. So you've got some special features that are required. The building orientation is a little more strict. The size of the garages has to be smaller, things of that nature. And then I said, like I said, multi-unit developments, these are those big scales, it's 5 or more dwelling units on a property. So we're talking like, that's the big things, anything past that, you're gonna have to meet all of those standards that we've had in place since the mid-2000s. For our multifamily standards, and those have been in place for a long time, we worked really hard to develop, so. We're pretty used to doing this stuff, it's all that previous housing options that are new to us. I'm trying to be a little quick here, I apologize. But the other housing things that I wanted to touch on were pre-approved plans for dwellings. So we do have a pre-approved, it was couched as the pre-approved ADU plan. But, the reality is the pre-approved plan for a small dwelling, well, what stopped me from putting 3 of those on a lot and calling it a triplex? Right, so, this is not just the pre-approved ADU plan, it's just the pre-approved dwelling plan. And these are essentially city, they go out and they allow people to submit designs to us. We vet those through the building permit process, right? So we know it's like, okay, this is structurally sound, you can go out and build it. You don't have to pay all the fees for that design review by our residential plans examiners. Instead, you just go, hey, I want to build this. We say, okay, $400 or whatever it is. And then you've got a set of plans that you didn't have to pay an architect for, right? And so that's essentially streamlining that process of getting to a building permit by saying, hey, which one of these options do you want to go build? And then you can go build it. And you do have to talk to people about stormwater and foundations and stuff, but it is lowering barriers to housing options, right? This is a big one and it's gonna be a little confusing, so I'm gonna really try to spell it out, because this is the one that you're gonna see in your neighborhood getting notices to people that are within 100 feet of these projects. Middle housing, so that's anybody know middle housing? Can somebody list them off for me? Anybody? We're in class today. Duplex? Triplex?
Anything that's not single family or an apartment building.
Pretty much, good job. Yeah, duplex, triplex, quadplex, cottage cluster, townhouses, right? So one thing that the state said, we said, okay, great, we created all these options for new housing, right? How many of us can afford a triplex? Sure as heck not me, right? So they said, how do we make home ownership easier? Well, one of the ways is to say, if you're gonna allow 3 detached units to be a triplex, why don't you sell off one of those units? Well, you can't unless you create a condo. Good luck doing that. So they created a really streamlined, easy process to essentially say, okay, you've got 3 units on a lot here. You can now come to us, the city, go through a really simple process, the Middle Housing Land Division, that creates child lots so that you can sell off each one of those units. It doesn't change what the development is. The development is still a triplex. But now you've created a home ownership opportunity to be able to buy 1/2 of a duplex, or to buy one part of a triplex, or one part of a fourplex. And so this Middle Housing Land Division is really changing the game in terms of not just having our middle housing developments, these fourplexes, not just be in the hands of investors, they can be in the hands of homeowners. And that's a big reality, is that on this parent lot here, I can always build a fourplex. Okay, but I can't always sell off individual units. And so it's like, I by right can go get a building permit, build my fourplex. But now I can go through this process, which doesn't change anything except for a few lines on the ground, so that I can sell off one of those units, or 2 of those units, or all of those units to new homeowners. This one is like, but people get the notice in the mail for these, and that really freaks them out. And the reality on the ground is that all it's doing is creating homeownership opportunities. The last thing I'll say is that, and this gets a little into the nuance here, is that due diligence is really important. Whatever you are doing on your property, with the state rules and otherwise, you always need to do your due diligence. So a lot of times that means come talking to us to find out which codes apply. Like right now, it's like we're under the state model code for middle housing. How many people would have known that unless you go to our website? Nobody, except for me. And so the other thing is that, people come into us all the time and they go, hey, I want to develop middle housing, but maybe you're out in Santa Clara and you're an unannexed property. Okay, well, the middle housing rules, all these housing options aren't available to you until you annex. And so there's things like that, or like CC&Rs or overlay zones. Those could be things that might prohibit or limit the way that you can develop these housing options on your property. So that's why it's really important to come either talk to the city, our permit information center, I'll have their information, I think, on this slide, numbers 541-682-8336, or land use info at Eugene, or come into the permanent information center, say, hey, this is my property. What am I allowed to do here? And they can tell you. That's the beauty of it, is but they're open every day from 12 to 4, and you can come talk to a human being about what you can do on your property, and they can help you flag some of those issues through that due diligence process. Okay, that was a lot. And I just want to call out that it is 7:10, so if you want to go sign up for public comment, do not hesitate to get up and leave. I will not be, I'll be slightly offended, but not that offended.
I've already done it online.
Absolutely. And you can sign in online, as Lynn said. John, I think that was the first question.
This is more of a statement for Leah, but you talked about, well, you can pretty much develop middle housing anywhere you want on a single family house. But you also mentioned CCNRs here. CCNRs are legal documents that have made interpretations that often now say you cannot put a second house on your lot and you cannot subdivide your lot. And a lot of them say you can't build a house that's any less than 2,000 square feet. You guys can't change that. But as you start developing your housing development strategies, are you looking at where those subdivisions are and realizing that they're not part of your buildable land inventory?
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing, right? So CCNRs, anybody know what that stands for?
Creedence Clearwater Revival.
That's the better one, right? Conditions, covenants, or restrictions. These are legal documents that apply to your property. The one thing I will say is that the city does not implement these. Okay, so this is a privately implemented document. We are not, and only in rare circumstances will the city ever party to that document. And those go back, that's like stuff that happened in the 60s usually. But as John rightfully stated, that is a legal document that we are not allowed to supersede through the changes in whether it's state law or local law, right? So if you do have that restriction that's on your property that says, I can only build one house on my lot, yes, that is enforceable, and your neighbor could take action to levy that CCNR against you. There are also methods to get rid of those. I am not a land use attorney. You should consult legal assistance to get that done. I'm gonna stay off that. So thanks for that, John. I
You
appreciate
didn't answer my question.
so there is no database to my knowledge that we have of that. I know that one of the best neighborhoods that I think did it was Southeast Neighbors. I think has a really great database of CCNRs. I'm not aware of any other database of that scale that exists today. I don't know, and I don't think Leah knows, because I don't think we've gotten at that stage yet to analyze that. Is that right?
No, and under the current state laws, we're not allowed to consider that in our buildable lands. That might change by the state law, but currently we're not allowed to consider it. But it's a
I think.
great point. I hear you. We will consider if we could.
So, you know, I'm not some of this is a little foreign to me, but basically, just so I make sure that I understand, let's say I own a house in Whitaker and I decide to put 3 lots on, or 3 homes on there. If I want, I could actually take those other 2 homes and rent them out as an Airbnb, is that correct?
That's correct.
And not create new homes for people, but actually come in as a developer, buy the property, upgrade it, and then just sell it to some students' families that come every month.
That's, yeah, so short-term rentals are completely outside of the scope. of
Which is what happens in my neighborhood a lot.
Sure, and I believe the city council discussed short-term rentals.
You can't really tell someone what to do with their
I know
property.
they talked, I know they looked into it.
Okay,
I know that they looked into it a few years ago, and is it coming back? I think it's on council's at least agenda of things that they want to address. Or at least hear more information. And I apologize, I wasn't on that team that looked at it before, so I can't.
it's okay. I mean, what you're saying is great and it's wonderful and people, you know, I was at a meeting recently where young kids stood up and said, what does it matter? I'll never own my own home. I'll never be able to do anything. And you're talking about things where they possibly could, which is great. And the dream is a great dream, but if you're some, you know, large corporation that comes up and buys out property and
And
in
the
a
rea-
low income area and updates it and then just rents it out like that.
and the reality here is that, yeah, I
That is
agree.
the reality.
It is a problem, but it's also private property, and I only have the rules that I'm allowed to implement. for
Right,
what
and I
people
just
can do.
wanted to clarify, and I understand
Yeah.
that. I get that.
Yeah.
I'm
Thank
just
you.
curious, if there's ever been talk amongst your team about like Eugene actually having an inventory of houses and like being the like property manager for renters who come in, so it's not quite home ownership for the people who would be there, but like the city would be providing housing to individuals with families.
I don't think that Eugene is looking at being property manager or producing housing ourselves anytime soon. There are certainly cities in other parts of the world that do a lot of that housing production work. Right now, we provide funding for affordable housing developers to actually build the housing. We provide financial incentives to lower the costs and the barriers to building housing, but we don't build housing ourselves. And I don't think that we would do that in the near future. That would be a pretty monumental shift to our, yeah, it's an interesting question though.
The lot coverage seems like a low hanging fruit to get, and it looks like there's nothing on there about changing that. I'm thinking about. So my house has what I guess is considered a normal sized Eugene lot. It's stupid huge. But there are people across the street, several houses across the street from me that were built around the same time before all of the lot coverage rules. They've got, essentially, there's the house, there's like a 5 foot wide, well, it's probably wider than, no, it is. It's about 5 foot wide strip to the sidewalk. That they have in flowers. And then they have a little courtyard in back that is as big as the city staffers are sitting, like, you know. And I think that would be delightful for someone retired who wants their own house but does not want to maintain a yard. And I don't think there isn't any way that can be built under these rules, right?
So, it is something that you can adjust, but you have to go through a bigger process to do that. And I think more importantly, so. When the city council adopted the local middle housing rules, all right, so these are like, so right now, like I said, we're under the state law. Because we're dealing with some appeal issues over with our actual code. So they actually expanded lot coverage for middle housing development. To basically make it easier, right? So they took it from 50% to 60%. Is that a huge difference? No, but at least it was some shift upwards. But the reality is if you look, when I presented to council on this, most Eugene lots, if you take into account the 10-foot front setback, the 5-foot side setbacks, it's all stupid. You're basically, I'll leave that one where it is. And you can basically develop everything in that and barely ever hit 50%, 60%. So like, for the most part, you can build out your lot, and then under the state law, John was talking earlier about floor area ratio, and those are actually regulated in a different way right now. Where you are allowed to, our lot coverage of 50% doesn't apply to those, they're under a different set of rules, and they actually can develop more. Long answer is that, it was something that was actually one of the big talking points during this process. And we landed where we landed, and it's something that I think we'll continue to talk about through, these projects as ways to, like you said, low hanging fruit to maybe move the bar.
Like one of the things that makes those townhouse neighborhoods so beautiful in a lot of East Coast cities and parts of San Francisco, which is not noted for affordability, but it's just they're right next to each other and they're like up into the street. Like it's really like, we're here, we're part of this.
And that's a lot of like
hiding from the street.
And that's a lot of like with townhouses, you can go even further, like the lot coverage is way higher because that's the intended development scale, right? And so that's where it's like, it's the purpose of all these different housing options is really to suit the nature of flexibility. To say, okay, I want to build, 4 units on here, but if I do that, I'm limited by the lot coverage. Well, if I make them full townhouses, now I can go higher, right? But I have to then make them front the street, they've gotta have some nice features to them, just to make the pedestrian walking area a little bit better. So flexibility is really key here, and I think that's really, the point of a lot of these different choices, the different options that are available to people now.
I agree with you. I used to have a house off of Lincoln Alley. Lot was like 60 by 70 feet. It was a single family house, single story house. It was great. My question is, R1, R2, R3, R4, does that matter anymore? Does it all go out the door?
No, it does matter actually quite a lot because, and the reason why I say this is most impactful to R1 is because we're not allowed to apply our maximum density rules to these like middle housing types, right? Basically, the state has said like, your maximum density has been the thing that has been holding you back from allowing fourplexes or triplexes, et cetera. But when you get into R2, R3, R4, the important piece that people forget about is that now you have a minimum density. So a lot of times you might not be able to build a fourplex because that's not enough units. Because the big thing with their work is like, we're trying to have enough housing overall, and those higher density areas hold people to account to build enough units to meet that need. And so R2, R3, and R4 are still absolutely crucial to meeting that need over time. Yeah.
Southwest Hills,
Yes.
all we have is houses,
Yeah,
very little commercial. We have like 5 commercial lots. How does this all impact us? I was just thinking, okay, how to get people to come to a meeting? Yeah, we're gonna propose a 20-minute walking development at the end of Chambers. I could blow my wife up. And that would get people to come,
yeah,
definitely to a meeting.
for better or for worse, it would.
Well, we get people to come to a meeting, I think you guys would not be real welcome. If you were the ones developing that, but, so what, I'm sitting here saying, most of what we've been talking about has no relevance to the southwest, to Churchill. I don't know, southeast has probably more commercial in it. But the South Hills it's strictly residential, single family for the most part. There are some townhouse developments off of, Chambers near 28.
I actually think
And
this is
further
extremely
out, Churchill area, there are some apartment complexes up there. Southwest Hills, we have almost none.
So there's a couple
So,
things.
what?
Sorry, go ahead.
So a lot of what you've talked about has no impact on us other than knowledge about the rest of the city.
No, you don't have any single family zoning in the neighborhood now because it's
Well,
open to all these other types of
True,
houses.
true. But anyone who's going to be developing anything like that is not gonna be, it's not gonna be welcome. I'm sorry, we're selfish. I get that.
And I'll just say, because.
Or am I mistaken? Am I missing something?
I mean, I think, so the South Hills is one area that does, it has some of our older PUDs that do have some of those CCNRs that are in place that might prohibit middle housing, but that's not all property. You know, I have a lot of people coming and talking to us. Actually, I would say that is less common than it is more common, and even in the South Hills. So it's like most people that come to us, they say, hey, can I go build a duplex? It's like, yep, go for it. And we have people, it doesn't matter if you're in the South Hills, if you're in Cal Young or wherever, people are asking us about this. And because people are trying to just find ways to, especially younger people, are trying to find ways to buy a house and then make it affordable over the long term. And one of the only ways to do that is to potentially build another unit on the property that you can turn into a way to help finance your own living situation, right? And so I just talked to a guy yesterday, that was exactly his plan. He was a 28-year-old kid. He was just trying to get into a neighborhood. It happened to be up off of Willamette, up in the hills. He's like, can I build another house in that lot? I was like, absolutely you can. I was like, great, that's the only way I can afford it.
Would he separate those two?
He's not planning on it, but he reserves that right to do it later.
One of the things that we're kind of overlooking, and obviously this has been addressed, is infrastructure. And on the house that I lived on Lincoln Alley, the house next door had a remodel, which meant it became a two-story house with a separate apartment in it. When that house sold, it turns out their sewer line with my yard, and they needed to do an upgrade of the sewer line because it was the old sewer line and it wasn't meant for 3 separate units on that sewer line. Different story there, but point is that there's other things that you need to look at, and obviously this was brought up in the court case. Is that being more addressed now?
Yeah, so when somebody comes in for a building permit, you know, we do I mean, we're calling it now because this is what the state law calls it, a sufficient infrastructure analysis, right? So we look at we get a letter from the UWeb whether or not they have enough water. We take a look at the wastewater system to see if the downstream impact, if it can run downhill. Put it that way. And then the other one is street access. So the fire department or fire marshal's office is looking to make sure that streets have adequate access there. And then the last one is stormwater. So they got, as long as they can meet our stormwater standards, they're not overrunning any of our basins. So we are doing that analysis as part of our building permit process. And the reality of the court case you alluded to is just more about syntax within the code than it is about actual implementation on a day-to-day basis, if that makes sense. Yeah, our permitting teams are like, okay, you know, they're not too frustrated with that process.
Forgive me, I'm quite naive and very privileged to ask this question, but who are we trying to house? Like, is it 28-year-olds? Is it early families? Like, I'm just curious, like, what is the biggest need for Eugene to house? Is it low income? Is it?
I think to that, and I'll let you answer more on the bigger scale of like, some of Heather's work and stuff, but like, you know.
This is a bad question.
No, it's a great question.
Okay.
And the reality is it's like, to be quite frankly, with these things, we don't care. You know, this is trying to just say, we have a housing need.
Okay.
And that's known. I mean, if you see property, you know, we've created through our urban growth boundaries in Oregon, an artificial demand, right? We say, hey, if we want to be sustainable, if we want to have compact development, we need to be dense. And that preserves our agricultural lands, our forest lands, those things that in Oregon we really value. But with the development that's occurred, you know, over time, as the city kind of grew organically, the reality is that we are not dense enough. And so we have a huge housing need, which is part of what's being studied, but also, how far behind are we?
Really far behind.
Like I think we're about 16,000 units is the number I hear thrown around a lot, behind from our, like, development.
So we in Eugene and Oregon more broadly need housing desperately, and we need it of all types and of all affordability levels. You know, the lack of affordable housing is a direct kind of causal factor to homelessness. It is really expensive to live in Eugene. You all know that it's expensive to buy a home here. The state is now allocating to us our housing need based on the statewide need, and they allocate it based on income level, so like the affordability of the housing. And it's across the spectrum from very, very low income all the way up to market rate, you know, folks making, you know, 6 figures, right? We need it all and everything in between. And that's why Jeff has talked a lot about flexibility. What we want to offer is lots of options so people can choose the housing that's the best fit for them and to be able to afford that housing option, right? So the more options you have, the more choice, the more locations that we can have a mix of different types of housing. That just means people can actually choose, which right now, many people are just forced into what they can afford, and that might not be the right fit for them or their family. So we're trying to look at more options, whether that be, you know, for a single individual or a student who can live in a smaller unit, all the way up to multi-generational homes and everything in between, right? And providing more flexibility for those things while also holding those values around compact development and preserving our permanent forest lands and the quality of life that I think we all really value here.
I'm happy to take 2 more, Beth and Jane's question. I do want to call, it is 1 minute to 7:30, so if you did want to get over there to sign up, you have 5 minutes.
So as the rules are changing, as you move through this, and we've done some development, I'm curious how you're looking at simplifying the navigation process for a builder from the annexation process to the permitting process to the finished product. Have you had some conversation around that? Because the rules have changed.
Yeah.
And as a result, many of us who have annexed a piece of property, for example, have had to come back again and again and again with the people that were working with the engineering firm because the rules have changed. And the way that they used to do things is no longer acceptable or complete.
Absolutely. So, I mean, one thing is like, we're always working to try to make that process better. However, it is one of the things that's in the housing production strategy and draft stuff is talking about that low hanging fruit, right? Making the process more clear, making it easier to navigate, having that streamlined pipeline from, building permit application to issuance is one of the things that is really important to us. And that's what our BPS team, building permit services team is really dedicated to. And a big part of that is our land use team trying to make the land use code more navigable. And so there's a lot of pieces as part of the bigger picture work that's trying to set forth the policy to really give us even further direction to go take action on making some of that stuff more simple.
One thing I'll just note, you mentioned Alyssa came and talked about annexation. So annexation in particular and ways that the city can make that process easier and incentivize people to annex into the city. We'll be going to council in the next couple of weeks. I think it's on the 28th. That might be
30th.
30th. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So that in particular, right, is just an example of a process that we're trying to make easier. All of this housing production work, I think we've regulated ourselves into a corner in a lot of ways. So we're trying to, I think that the tide has turned. And we're really trying to look at how can we remove some of those regulatory barriers while still emphasizing the outcomes and the quality of life that we want.
And cost.
And cost, yeah, totally.
A good number of years ago, at another time when the discussion was the urban growth boundary, to expand the urban growth boundary, it might have been 10 or 20 years ago, if somebody can correct me. As I recall, the city was trying to move in the direction that you're talking about now, which of course we need to. And they even, if you can imagine sort of a pie chart with different slices of the pie chart being different types of housing. And the way the city had it sliced up, the home builders were really irritated because it didn't leave a big enough slice for suburban style housing. And they pressured the city to make that slice bigger because developers make more money on big houses, just like car manufacturers make more money on big cars. The market wants to encourage and almost force people into oversized everything, whether it's food, whether it's housing, whether it's transportation. We're dealing with that right now, we've gone way too far and but in this current iteration of expanding the urban growth boundary, is this any kind of a thought that the home builders are saying, hey, we want to build these big 3, 4, 5,000 square foot houses and they have political clout too, So how do you deal with people who want to continue to overbuild and have these titanic ecological footprints?
So from the long range planning side, the conversation you're talking about, we would call it like our housing mix. So what is the mix that we're planning for of single family, of middle housing types and of multi-unit development, right? And what's like the pie chart of those types? It was very political last time. Neither Jeff or I were at the city when those conversations were happening, but we've heard a lot about it. I think now under this kind of new paradigm of how we plan for housing locally and knowing that we'll have our housing needs broken down by income, you're right. Single unit development is more expensive. It results in a more expensive product. Those are not necessarily affordable to the lowest income community members. So we will have to demonstrate to the state to say, here's how we're planning for smaller units, for more affordable units. knowing that we still want to provide flexibility, we still want to provide the range of housing options. But we'll have to be doing more at that kind of more affordable product. So I think I'm sure we'll get political again when we take up that topic at council, but there's a little bit more structure and rules from the state and how we're planning for our need that it hopefully doesn't spin out of it.
Does the issue of climate change enter into this any, because the bigger house has a bigger climate footprint, all of that stuff.
And it absolutely does. I mean, I think that's a big part of our trying to coalesce and talk about the multiple documents, whether it's from the CAP and everything, the climate action plan. And how that kind of interacts with our own long range planning documents. And I'll just say, I want to thank everybody for the chance to be here tonight. You know, we're always thrilled to kind of get the word out and talk about our projects. And this was a really great venue and great question. So thank you.
I want to say thank you to planning staff for being here. And thank you to all of you. Great questions, great conversation. I'm sitting back there going, I didn't know that. Great. So thank all of you. Thank you for being here.
And thank you for being such a good host.
I wanted to remind folks, I'll need your visitor badges back. And if you've not been to a city council meeting yet, tonight's a perfect opportunity just to pop in, see how it looks. The council chambers is beautiful. It's amazing. Encourage you just to pop in and take a look if you would like, and if not, come back some other time. I will send out a link to the video. We recorded this to everybody on the all boards list so everybody can watch, and we'll send out the slide deck so that everybody can take a look at that as well. Did I miss anything on that?
That's it. Thank you.
Please take a poster.
Please take a
They'll
poster.
expand your thinking
grab it,
almost
grab it all.
guaranteed.
And thank you to Julian for all of the
Yes.
technology stuff.
Thank you, Julie.